Okay, welcome to the first of what will hopefully be a series of tutorials on Sarah Walker's The Little Stranger. I'm currently teaching this novel to my A-level students as part of the Edexcel spec. They will actually sit an exam where they compare this novel to Bram Stoker's Dracula under the linked theme of the supernatural. For this first tutorial, I'm just going to spend a bit of time looking at the first paragraph of the novel, doing a close reading of this extract, just to gain an initial impression of the narrator, Dr. Faraday, but also to try and highlight how Sarah Waters introduces some key themes in this opening section. So I'm going to start with the first line of the novel here. I first saw Hundreds Hall when I was 10 years old. This opening sentence is very important because it highlights two things. Firstly, the significance of Hundreds Hall is alluded to in the fact it is mentioned in the first few words of the novel. And also the idea that the Doctor is confessing about how impressionable he was at the age of 10 when he first witnessed the lifestyle of the Ayrses, the hall and its opulent nature. So our narrator makes clear those two things from the word go. The importance of the hall and his impressionable nature as a child. We get very early on the impression that the Ayres family hit hard times, that the wealth that the 10-year-old witnesses is something that they will lose, and their influence and significance in the district is also something that is lost, presumably. It's referred to as of them still having their money and still being big people in the district, foreshadowing that this will eventually not be the case. The first real significant image we are given by the narrator is, for me, one of class division. He describes standing in line with the other village children, the working class children, as Mrs. Ayres and the Colonel paraded past them, and you get this very clear impression that these two groups of people are very different, that one is subservient to the other. And this is an idea that is carried on and extended throughout the first paragraph. Interestingly, the family itself is not what particularly strikes the young Doctor, but the house is what he is impressed by. He describes this as an absolute mansion. And when you think about the Doctor's own quite humble background, it's quite easy to appreciate how somewhere like Hundreds Hall would feel very alien to him, very impressive in terms of scale and grandeur. We get a real indication that he is quite smitten by this place, almost in love with everything that it represents, and the detail that he gives us is a very romantic kind of description of an old building. Interestingly, this simile that's used, the fact that the edgings made it look blurred, slightly uncertain, like an ice, I thought, just beginning to melt in the sun, is also potentially a way of Waters foreshadowing the demise of the Ayrses. It seems like something that is on the brink of change, on the brink of transition, something that will eventually crumble, their status, their power, their influence. And that, of course, alludes to the change and social reform that came about as a result of the Second World War, the end of the Second World War, and the rise of the Labour government. I think this next little section is particularly interesting. The doctor tells us that there were no trips inside, despite the fact that the doors and French windows stood open almost in a tempting way. They could capture a glimpse of the lives of these people, but in no way were they welcome to be part of it. And we're even told that a piece of rope and ribbon were used to tie across it. This is also extended, this idea of separation and exclusivity is extended by the description of the lavatories being in the stable block for the village folk. And again, you could read into this idea of a kind of subspecies of the working class being distinctly different from the heirs and treated differently as a result. We find out later on in this chapter that Dr. Faraday's mother used to work at the halls and apparently still knew people who were servants there. So he ends up trespassing into this house at such a tender age, and this has obviously had a significant, or left a significant impression on him. The way it's described as his mother sort of smuggling him in, she took me quietly into the house by a side door, is important. We definitely get this sense that he is not meant to be there, that it's secretive, and it would be frowned upon by the heirs. The visit impressed me terribly. Again, there's this echo of the kind of significance of this event. And interestingly, for my kids who are looking at this as an example of the Gothic and considering the supernatural elements of this text, this description of the kitchen in particular is quite intriguing. So we get classic Gothic use of setting in place. So the cool vaulted corridor with something of a feel of a castle dungeon, perhaps suggesting how these servants that work below the grand hall are imprisoned in some way and trapped. You could do quite a nice Marxist interpretation of that particular quote. This idea again of the masses working for the minority, the privileged minority, is extended in the next sentence. An extraordinary number of people seem to be coming and going along it with hampers and trays. The sheer scale of the event he is quite in awe of. The mountain of crockery, again suggesting extravagance and opulence, and also sort of highlighting the extent to which others are working to sustain this rather opulent lifestyle that the heirs are living. Interestingly, the mum rolls up her sleeves and gets on with helping the servants clean up the mountain of crockery, and she assumes that role of the working class servant, whereas her son is rewarded for her labour by allowing to sit at the tabletop and have his own pick of jellies and shapes. And I think this is actually quite an interesting insight into the family dynamic of the Doctor. Later on in this chapter, the Doctor mentions how self-sacrificing his parents were, and he has always been different from them and certainly treated differently to them from a young age. And I think this sort of elevating of the Doctor as a child by his parents has perhaps led him to believe that he is entitled, I think he mentions it later on, he's entitled to a piece of the lifestyle that the heirs live, that he is meant to be something better than simply a working class village boy. That idea is extended again when it says, I was put to sit at the deal-topped table and given a spoon from the family's own drawer. Yeah, this idea that he's actually invading upon the family's private life, their private space, is emphasised here. Anyway, that's a very brief walk through the first paragraph. If you would like to leave me any comments, that would be great in terms of what you found useful or what you'd like me to focus on in future tutorials. Just let me know.